Okay, so we're now recording. It's 1:07 on Wednesday, November 8th. This is the steering committee meeting, and we have 9 folks joining. I think you can see all of them, all the names. Let's see, SIG testing is Aaron, and SIGNode is Quint. No, who's SIGNode?
Network is me.
This is Derek. I'm sorry.
Eric. Yeah, no worries. We need the decoder ring whenever we show these things. Yeah. So go ahead, take it away, Aaron.
Okay, cool. So just some points of administrivia around. We all, broadly speaking, want to be as public as possible. I want to make sure that that our meeting notes can be public. The question is whether or not the existing meeting notes stock that we have right now, do we just go ahead and make that public, or do we prefer the idea of, I don't know, copying it to another doc or posting to the repo? The only argument I would have against making this doc public right now is as we're taking notes, which, by the way, can I get somebody to volunteer as a note taker? Joe and Brandon have volunteered nicely for this in the past, so maybe somebody else. Thank you, Sarah. It could encourage somebody to just watch the meeting live by way of notes, which, whatever, if they're really that interested, I guess they can. So any disagreement to just making the existing meeting notes doc public to this, I guess, Kubernetes dev read only?
I mean, can somebody volunteer just to do a really sort of quick read through it and make sure that nothing's gonna be interpreted? Okay. I think the biggest concern that I have would just be, things being misinterpreted, without full context.
Yep.
Thank you, Aaron.
Okay, so next thing would be, since we're recording this meeting, we're going to want to post it somewhere. The way I've historically done it as a SIG is I just post the meeting to my personal account and then share it to a Kubernetes playlist. Joe, you happen to be recording today. We could just say that whoever's recording the meeting posts it to their personal playlist. On the other hand, I think the Kubernetes community meetings are posted through some special Kubernetes account. Do we care? Have any thoughts?
There is a Kubernetes YouTube channel, which we can host directly at, but it is no different than, or not substantially different than creating a playlist there and having us post them wherever they post and then using the playlist. Unless, of course, you ever want to clean out your YouTube channel for some reason. George can help us create a playlist, and then I think that's the simplest method.
I mean, does this is there a hit by a bus issue here? I mean, not that in 10 years anybody's going to want to watch these movies anyway, but yeah.
So I'll talk to George. I know he has creds to the YouTube channel, and I'll get the stuff posted.
Okay, that makes sense.
So you can add an action item for me on that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't really mind. So people who watch SIG testing meetings get suggestions to watch videos of me drumming. So whatever, it's fine. Okay, there was an issue filed against our repo from the CNCF asking if we had nominated somebody as our rep. We had volunteered Michelle as tribute. Do we need to formally hold a public vote on our mailing list or anything?
It was announced already.
It's kind of a fait accompli.
We responded on that issue and said, yeah, it's her. When you say announced, was there an announcement on any other forum or something?
Well, it was announced on multiple CNCF mailing lists.
Okay, great, cool.
And Twitter, which is, that's official then.
Yeah, that's put a bird on it. Okay. So Brandon volunteered to be the next bosun. I'm happy to be bosun for one more go or hand off to Brandon. Does anybody care in particular?
What did we decide the granularity was?
Granularity was basically every month.
So we started mid-month, and I'm wondering if we should just continue until the end of this month and then start.
That's fine. I'm happy to close out November.
Okay.
So
there are no meetings in December, are there?
There aren't?
Well, I'm not going to attend any because there's KubeCon.
Yeah.
And post-KubeCon.
Excuse week.
Yeah, there's one scheduled during KubeCon. I assume that we're not going to do that. And then there's the 20th.
which I'm going to be out.
I don't know. I mean, we should see if we could see if we can make quorum there. I can make that meeting. I'm not planning on being out there, but like, I don't know how other folks are handling it.
Yeah. Okay, let's not decide that today, but I will close out November. Okay, action item follow-up. So Tim literally created the mailing lists we were talking about last meeting as we were talking about them, which was super awesome. I feel like we might be vaguely unclear on whether or not we're documented the policy for when public and when private. I saw some discussion on the public or private mailing list from Clayton about like, hey, maybe we want to make it clear to people that they could post to steering private, and then we could advocate that, hey, could you please take this public? It seems like it's worth taking public. A, do people think that's a good idea? B, does this mean we need like a pull request to contributing or something? The contributing.md file that Joe so nicely put a pull request in for after last meeting.
Did we have real use cases for people who'd want to contact us privately that wasn't COC or security?
I think people would end up like contacting us individually.
That's what's happened in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like, is there any topic that we endorse them contacting us privately for that we wouldn't say this should go to the public list?
The example I gave was where you wanted to ask a question about like the disagreement between two SIGs or two people within two SIGs. And it's not really code of conduct because it's a disagreement. And you may not want to publicly go and say, hey, I've had this big disagreement between SIG CLI. You might very well, but like I get that a lot, which is, hey, can you negotiate between these two points of view?
Right.
And I would usually say like, you know, if it's personal, let's get a broader group involved. It's not quite code of conduct because I think there are going to be people who might see code of conduct as only people who are actively seeking to do harm versus disagreement.
Right. I'm fine with it.
I'm okay having it, you know, and saying, but like, hey, you know, when at all possible, please.
Yeah, I don't think many people will use it, and then if it's not useful, like it doesn't hurt anything.
Well, I think that's where I also get a fair amount of that. Hopefully having a formal escalation process will, at least for technical issues, I mean, maybe not all disagreements are technical for sure, but hopefully that will address some number of these at some point. But yeah, for now, maybe just telling people they can send to the private list if they have any concerns is a fine thing to do.
Okay. Objections? I'll make this change to make it postable.
Go for it. Can we get somebody to take an action item to pull request to contributing.md? Right now it says send an email to steering, and it sounds like we just need a sentence that says if you need a private discussion, email steering private. Words aren't coming to me right now.
I can do that.
Thank you, Michelle.
Hey, Michelle, feel free to just slam that in. I think we're all, you know, no need to go through formal pull requests on that.
Please pull request. Pull request all the time.
Okay, well, you can merge your own pull request. Can we say that?
I'll be around to just rubber stamp it. It's fine.
Yeah, but I think merging your own pull request is fine. I like the audit trail of having pull requests, but I think self-merge is fine.
Yeah, likewise.
So on the same topic, there was some unclarity as to whether the steering public list is subscribable by people or not.
I don't have any objection.
I don't see any reason not, unless we somehow want to use it for an auth group somewhere.
So my only fear, and it's currently implemented as subscribable, and a few people have subscribed, and there was at least one thread that was involving Matt, who is not a steering committee person, right? My only fear is that it just turns into Kubernetes dev, and that we lose focus as to which one's for what. Like, honestly, I thought the kernel's distributions conversation could have just as easily gone on Kubernetes dev.
I second that, Tim.
That's kind of my concern, is that the more people on a list, the more it turns into sort of rapid fire, boom, boom, boom type of discussions, and that's just going to create. It's going to be harder for us to focus on stuff.
That sounds reasonable to me. I don't have any. Yeah, I don't feel strongly one way or the other, and that seems like a real risk. So it's fine.
I think it makes sense.
Sorry. So is there a decision? I don't know what is. Are we changing the policy from?
Yeah, kick people off who aren't on the committee and close it.
I don't mind people being on the thread, and I think if it's something that people want the steering committee's opinion on, I think it's a valid question. But I also don't feel super strongly about it. That's just my perspective. So if everybody else wants to close it, that's fine too.
I mean, the other thing that we can do. Sorry, Quinn, go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, we're getting back to this can you read or can you write issue. So clearly we want people to be able to communicate to the steering committee, right? So that's private is writable by everybody. So anybody can send to the steering committee and nobody can read that. And then there is, what can people get into discussions and respond to discussions on a given topic? And I think that's the problem we're running into, right? So isn't that solvable by just not having, I guess you don't, there isn't a permutation of read and write that solves that problem other than shutting down the list. Okay.
Well, isn't you can post, but you can't subscribe, which means you're not going to get random responses, but you'll see your own posts.
We could also, we could make all of us managers of the list, and we can say managers can post.
All right, so here's another idea. How about we say, the benefit, the purpose of this is for the steering committee to benefit. If discussions are getting out of control, then we'll retarget them to the appropriate list. We put that in the contributing also. And then if somebody's really sort of being super randomizing, we just sort of have a private conversation saying, hey, we really need to keep this list focused.
I would prefer that approach as well.
That sounds good.
I agree some of the discussions got pretty passionate pretty quickly, but I wouldn't have seen anything wrong with somebody saying, this seems like it's out of scope for this list. And these sorts of examples will better help us define what the scope of the list really is, because we don't know. We're iterating, so
we're still figuring this out.
Yeah.
So we leave it as it is?
Document that in the contributing also?
I am okay leaving it as is, and something in contributing saying we have the right to suggest that the conversation is causing too much noise for what we hope is a high signal list. Okay, anything else on the mailing lists and how we use them? All right, next up, the charter. We all had an action item last time to go read the charter and decide if we were ready to ratify it. The gist that I took away was everybody is like, yeah, it kind of makes sense, but also a lot of it was really bootstrap centric, and we'd like some way to create an amendment process. I think I saw a suggestion from Tim St. Clair about just straight up making a new straw man to try and remove all the bootstrap stuff. I saw something from Quentin about could we just make a simple amendment process, and I saw something from Brian about, hey, what about if we use my modified lazy consensus thing? What can we do to drive this to completion and actually ratify the charter before KubeCon?
I think just stripping down the main one for its basics, because I think in my email, I don't recall, but the charter should have 3 main topic areas. I think I wrote them down. If not, I actually took up some homework on it, but I forgot to bring notes. But we kind of went beyond that in the scope of the original document. And it was meant to be as how do we bootstrap this individual process. So if we rip that out and just keep it, mission, scope, and outline. If we keep that very concise, I think we can just move forwards and maybe punt off some of the other election things to its own doc, right?
Yeah, I'm in favor of doing the election stuff in its own doc.
Okay, I agree with that.
I think the biggest thing that I think we really as a group need to nail down before the next election is move past sort of our less than ideal member of standing mechanism into something that is sort of more sustainable. But that is not something to do right now.
Yeah, I think the doc is vague about how members of standing are chosen, right?
My only concern with redefining the charter now is I don't want to see us go through another multi-week long process of coming to consensus. If it's just this group's responsibility to come to consensus on that doc, that's possible, but I would really like to see us have this done in 2 weeks. Because
yeah, and so right now, I think amendment process-wise, if someone proposes a PR and it gets LGTM'd by all of the steering committee members, that seems like a fine starting point. And then if we need to relax that to make faster changes in the future, we can refine the vote, come up with a voting scheme or something.
So if we were to do a PR, would that allow other members of the Kubernetes organization to comment on that PR?
I imagine most would, yes, would be able to.
Right.
I feel like they wouldn't really be interested in that. So.
You don't have to advertise it.
Astonished.
Do you want people to comment or you don't want people to comment?
I would rather, I felt like there were some pretty long comment strings on it last time that caused it to go on longer than it need to. I mean, as long as we're clear that it's really this group's responsibility to come to consensus on it, not the community.
Yeah, I'd say the easiest thing to do about that is just don't advertise that we're doing it. We actively solicited comments multiple times on the original document. So
there might be some who would say those comments weren't addressed. We just moved forward anyway.
Which is
they were all considered. They weren't all addressed.
Yeah, and that's where we have to understand.
Okay, that's fair.
And who are approvers, right?
That's fair. A pull request and LGTMs from everybody, like the most same thing. I just wanted to point out that thing. Okay, so Tim St. Clair, does that sound like a PR you'd be willing to put up?
I can put up a PR soonish.
Okay.
For some of the modifications I was looking at, but I think it requires potentially a couple PRs to make it clean that we all agree upon, because right now it's kind of bloated, and I don't know if it's the structure that we want, right? Ideally going forwards. So I think we should just kind of be a little more fluid, and then at some point in time revisit for full ratification consensus. Because if we try to make everybody else all agree upon every PR, it may take too long to get done.
According to our existing charter, we just need quorum, which would be 2/3, right?
For every PR?
Well, what are we using to signify ratification here?
That the end result is complete. Like, I'd rather have a couple of people who can fast turn on shuffling the doc around to make it look the way we think it should, and then coming back for consensus for ratification.
So don't do that in place. Do it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest. Create a draft file, operate on that, boom, 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 and then the PR to essentially swap in the draft would be the one that we would call a vote on.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I guess I'm hearing it would be desirable to see you just throw together a Google Doc and share it with this group. Allow private to comment, allow public to view only, and we drive this in the public's view.
But the focus is specifically on streamlining the stuff that's there to remove the initial election material, to move that to a separate doc, and not to rewrite the thing, right?
And yes. What I heard from Tim, or what I took away, was we want to remove the bootstrap-related cruft. We want to defer redefining and articulating election-related stuff, including members of standing. And we want to make sure we have in place an amendment process.
Yeah, I'm a little worried. I mean, we've been at this for a month now, and we still haven't ratified the thing. And
That's why I'm
sounds
jumping
like
up and
we're
down.
not totally in agreement what should be in and out. I just can't help thinking that all we need is to say, we had that document, we agreed upon it, there's nothing in there that's wrong. We can shuffle stuff around, move parts to different documents, whatever, but we don't need to do that to ratify what we already have. The only thing that I saw that was really problematic is that there's no defined process for changing it. So that we see, if we're going to defer any changes, we have to have like some agreement on what that's going to look like.
The mission statement of the first thing is totally incorrect, though. The mission statement in the beginning, I'm not going to, I hate to like needle this, but it's not what this group is intended to do. The mission statement in the original document was how to formulate the Bootstrap committee. That's not what our mission is, right? So that's the reason why it's odd. Even though the document took a long time, it was for the initial group. So that's not what our charter should be. Our charter is not to talk about the Bootstrap committee and to get this process started.
I'm going to have another look at the doc. I don't remember that being the charter. The charter said what the charter of the actual steering committee was, but I'll have to go and reread it.
But I kind of side with Quentin in that I think the most critical piece that is not there is a documented process for how we change it that we've all agreed to. Like we literally just like, should we pull request it? Should we Google Doc it? If we get that, then we can work on the rest of the stuff.
So who is taking an action item to draft an amendment process and then review the existing language?
I'm not going to do the amendment process, but I'll streamline the main doc.
I mean, do we have any strong opinions right now on amendment process other than like, to me, 2/3 or, I mean, is it really that complicated that we need to draft too much around it?
I don't think it's hugely complicated. I think we just need to have something, because once we have something, we can always change it with said process.
Okay.
Yeah, I think simpler is better, less is more. Right. If this is longer than a paragraph or two, we're doing it wrong.
Yes. So, Tim Hawkins.
So would it be fair to say that like the amendment process is an amendment is posted to steering committee 1 week in advance and is ratified with 2/3 vote?
Also, and some of this discussion we had earlier on about consensus, lazy consensus voting, etc., would deal with cases like, well, what if someone calls a vote in December and literally a third of the steering committee is out? Is it still okay to have a vote then? I mean, we could just say, well, we'll just trust people for now and start with 2/3, and we shouldn't be changing the document that much. I'm fine with that.
But hold on, it's 2/3 of the steering committee, not 2/3 of the people who happen to be present. I mean, if you have three
2/3
people,
of the steering committee.
Yeah, so if 1/3 of the steering committee are not contactable, then you just can't get a change approved.
And I'm okay saying that we'll do lazy consensus for like day-to-day business type of stuff, but for like something like amending the charter, I think just, saying we need a straight up or down vote seems reasonable.
I also think, I mean, I don't know, do we genuinely believe that people are going to try and pull things like that and not get it called? Like, I hope we don't ever degrade to a point where most people would say that's just too big a decision for us to make with that number of people missing, even if.
Yeah, so I'm fine with just starting with 2/3 and some reasonable amount of time. Small.
Okay. So just who is taking the action to suggest that amendment process?
I mean, I can type up whatever we just said here, which was 1 week advance, 2/3, 1 week advance notice, 2/3 vote ratify will be done. So Tim, if you want to do that in the same doc that you were going to getting the bootstrapping language out, I'd be happy to.
Do we want to just say we vote on the public mailing list, or that's what CNCF does? It seems to work fine.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, that's fine too.
Yes.
That's the way it's archived and it's immutable. that was one of the issues with using GitHub PRs, is that anybody with write access can change the record theoretically. So.
Okay. All right, so I feel like by the next time we meet, we'll definitely have an amendment process, and we'll at least have a pull request that we may have come to consensus to for simplifying the charter. And that's good. I mean, it feels like a pretty reasonable thing to execute on. Okay. Unless anybody has anything else, I want to spend the rest of the time talking about incubation. I'm not really sure how to facilitate or lead this discussion. I feel like every time we talk about it, we end up trying to solve multiple problems all at once. I think that I would like to come away from today with like some actual things we can do to push the ball forward. It sounds like there are a couple one thing seems to be a review of what's in Kubernetes incubator and like what needs to be in and what needs to be out. It seems like there's a definition of what the Kubernetes project and its architectural vision are. At present, I don't know where that's written down, and it sounds like we're suggesting that SIG architecture owns that, and so you'd have to just go talk to SIG architecture. There's also the problem of endorsement, or what is in, what is out. And yeah, Brian posted that there's the potential for an ecosystem working group, but as much as it pains me to suggest yet another working group or SIG for this project, it doesn't seem like there is an existing body of people whose sole purpose is to facilitate the promotion and discovery of projects within the Kubernetes ecosystem. So I rattled off a bunch of things. They all kind of seem to revolve around incubator. How would we like to proceed in breaking the problem down and assigning people to take on pieces of this problem?
So I sort of see three categories of this. One is what I would call SIG-sponsored projects, which I think every SIG should just have their own scratch space. And this is things like, like the Kubernetes autoscaler, or the work on snapshotting file systems, or there's a bunch of these sort of like, we think that this might eventually be part of core, but the SIG is going to explore it out of core for a while, and maybe it'll stay out of core. And I think those should be mostly freeform, and if a SIG wants to work in one of those spaces, they should be able to work in one of those spaces. And then I think there's the like, everybody wants to be an incubator for the official Kubernetes part, or for the CNCF, CLA, or whatever. And I think that we should just get rid of all of that. And then I think there's a notion of like, well, what are about the things that started on the outside, like Helm, but we kind of want to maybe bring in? And I think we could actually just punt that and say, hey, we'll deal with that on a case-by-case basis when and if it turns out to be a thing.
But there's another category, which is projects that are not in incubation now, are graduated, yet still don't necessarily fit our definition of what we think should be.
Yeah, I feel like that's a hornet's nest, and we should just be like, well, sorry, grandfathered in, like it just is what it is. Maybe someday we can clean it up, but we got better things to do than worry about that. That's how
in the Kubernetes org. I really don't think that number makes sense.
I think we should have a sunset period, honestly. I don't agree that we should grandfather things in and just let it slide, because it sets a weird precedent where these other projects then have this weird pull against ones that want to get into the repo. And I think if we provide a sunset period with a graceful way to on-ramp into some other process, that gives a long tail for folks to transition, right, in a safe, meaningful way. And part of the conversation we had last time, which Phil wrote a ton of notes on, which was really good, was the idea of potentially having a separate org or a set of orgs that this could live in. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be underneath the Kubernetes umbrella, right?
So,
I'm not opposed to
sorry, I didn't hear what Aaron said before Tim started talking.
Oh, I was just saying we have about 61 repos in the Kubernetes org, and that number doesn't make sense to me going forward.
Oh, I actually think it doesn't make sense and that it's not enough.
My primary concern is that the existing set of repos we have don't have always a clear chartered boundary. And so if we let certain things stay grandfathered, I think it's just moving a conversation from one area to a rather loosely worded repo. So
I mean, I'm not opposed to ungrandfathering things or sunsetting them as Tim suggested. I just think that that's the biggest fight, right? And so if we want to make progress, I suggest that that is not the first thing that we should deal with, because I just don't think we'll make progress. I think we'll just get mired in that.
Are we just discussing the exact same stuff that we discussed last time?
Yep.
We are a little bit, so hang on.
Can I bring up a new topic in this?
Sure.
So the first category that we brought up was things that are owned by a SIG. The process whereby a SIG decides which repo gets there is, if a SIG decides to adopt something, what constitutes the SIG? And, do we feel that every SIG today would be reasonably scoped and happy to do that? Because does it require participation? Does it require membership? Does it require a vote? Some of these details, I don't think we have to sort out now, but I think the hidden assumption, which is that the SIGs are today structured to, make a decision about what can or can't be in the repo. Like, just as an example, the node, if SIG node says we want to take a new container runtime into Kubernetes, that would happen because we have, a fairly concise SIG, but some of the looser SIGs might not care or might not be swayed by that.
So to be clear, what I was suggesting is that we have Kubernetes SIG node as the top level org, not Kubernetes or Kubernetes / SIG node.
So if Kubernetes node adopted, Hyper-V, just as a non-contentious example, is that something that SIG node can do? And
I think they can.
Because that's code that doesn't belong to us. So if it requires transfer of copyright and CLA analysis and stuff like that, that's a totally different problem.
Yeah.
And starting a new project with new code.
Okay, so starting a new container runtime is totally within scope for SIG node, and I would agree if you could convince enough people to go do it. And that I think bounds it a little bit more.
Right, and that was what I had in mind, was like, these are the projects where the SIG itself has decided it's something it wants to go do. Not that they're going to go adopt something that's out there, but it's like, no, we think we want to go do, SOD is doing this with snapshot files, right? It's an exploration. They don't want to do it in core. They have a separate project for it.
And maybe another contentious example that's very useful is some of the app def working group, the plugins that we're kind of talking about as prototypes. We'd say, it's very reasonable for SIG CLI to go create a number of prototype repos underneath SIG CLI. And just because it's under the CLI SIG doesn't mean that you have to use it. What's the boundary there? Is it...
Right now, one issue we have is there's no clear notion of deciders for each SIG.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was teasing.
And my issue is that, I really... Yeah, I feel like it should be tied somewhat loosely to owners in Cube, but I'm not sure how others feel on that.
No, I
think it should be. In one way or the other, those things should be related in some way. I think that's not the discussion that we're having today, unfortunately.
I think that, I honestly, I think that the goal of making every SIG have its own GitHub organization is actually to decentralize it, so that break the tie, so that it doesn't feel, so that the officialness comes from the SIG, not from the broader Kubernetes community.
Well, and we can also promote things out of a SIG into the main Kubernetes.
Oh, right, exactly.
Right,
okay. I think that's totally fine, and we may very well do that kind of thing. But I feel
that's very reasonable, I think, and something under SIG or Kubernetes SIG CLI is a lot less contentious than Kubernetes dash config management or Kubernetes dash container engine or something like that.
Right.
So just as a straw man, it seems like Kubernetes Incubator today is that playground or that safe organization that collectively all SIGs could dump any repo that they want to, which is in fact what some of them do. Now hang on, let's forget the word incubator for a second. Because I'm trying to think about what you proposed without having the overhead of managing 26 different GitHub organizations.
No, but I think that actually
part of the assumption with Incubator is that there is a graduation process, and that graduation is a right, not something that is done sort of as.
No, I'm just proposing, like, what if it was just one organization? Forget the concept of an incubator process. Just one GitHub organization into which SIGs can put.
No, I don't think so, because I think that the trouble is it's either Kubernetes contrib, which was the dumpster fire, or there's this expectation that it's the official thing, right? Like it's the incubation of the config manager to become the official thing. I think by giving each SIG their own repo, you break the association with the broader Kubernetes project and the sort of like, I want to be the official Kubernetes version of X issue.
You also really increase the management overhead of the project as a whole.
Why? This is all robots, right?
Humans implement the robots.
No, but the robot exists, like the CLA bot.
Also, hang on. It's not just robots, it's people and process.
No, like, I mean, like, look at like Kubernetes client, right? Like, yes, the process that's on Kubernetes client is not nearly as good as the process that's on Kubernetes, but it's good enough for the use, and it has the CLA bot. And like, I don't think setting up all the Kubernetes client repos has been particularly onerous on anybody. Like, you know.
And it also devolves a little bit of we do want SIGs to be a little bit more self-directed, right? It can't be this hierarchy of centralized, you must go do this. SIG testing potentially should be able to offer feedback that if we go do this in too much of a direction, we're going to cause ourselves lots of problems. But I do think we have examples where a loose model works okay, certainly for prototyping.
So what is the level of test infrastructure services that a SIG organization-sponsored project could consume from the Kube organization?
Okay, that is an interesting question, but I feel like we need to drive to like some actionable stuff. If that's okay.
I feel like that's like concretely tied to like what is happening here. Like the incubator, there is inconsistent.
Whether or not joining like a Kubernetes organization gets you like some consistent tooling and process and blessing from Kubernetes and stuff is all like orthogonal to the incubation process. It's not really a goal that we're trying to solve right now. What I took away from our discussion about incubation last time was that we really need to unblock people who are contributing code that is in the scope of the Kubernetes project and its architectural vision, who today are stuffing it into Kubernetes. And we would rather find a fast track to ensure that they are being good citizens and starting those projects outside of the main Kubernetes repo, but we don't want them starting in Kubernetes Incubator because everybody seems to think Incubator means not ready yet.
Well, I would ask why people don't think they can just start it in a new org. And I would say that the reason they don't want to start it in a new org is for some reason they want the official blessing. And I think that's actually something we want to break.
So we really do want to break the official blessing. What I'm trying
unless it's a SIG. Unless it's a SIG that has already decided, like, we are going to go do this officially as a SIG. And that's why I think that the right answer is to say, we have SIG orgs. Those are the things the SIG has proactively decided it wants to build. And then we have everything else. And that's the things that people have decided they want to build. And there is no other thing, right? And there isn't a sort of like this quasi-official but not official sort of situation.
I'm confused, Brennan. Is there a Kubernetes org and then there's Kubernetes SIGs orgs?
I mean, we'll keep the existing Kubernetes org, right, that we have. That's fine. But then every SIG, you'll have Kubernetes-SIG-CLI or Kubernetes-SIG-API machinery or SIG Kubernetes/SIG. Like it's not.
So if we break out kube control, we would break it out into Kubernetes/kube control or Kubernetes SIG-CLI/kube control.
Well, I think there are some things that are already part of the Kubernetes repo that are already official like that you might want to break out as Kubernetes/kube control. So what I'm thinking about is more like the projects like I mean, I think, as I said, like, I think the file snapshot project is a really good example where it's like, it's an exploration. It may become part of the official API, but really it's just SIG storage that's playing around with it. And they need a playground to play around with that thing.
Here's what I feel is lacking from this discussion right now that I would like us to have by next discussion. I want to understand what the architectural vision is for Kubernetes that helps us define what the Kubernetes project is, with a straw man of like what repos scattered amongst the Kubernetes org and the Kubernetes incubator org fit that vision. I would also like us to go through and figure out, loosely speaking, what do we think the mapping is from SIG to repository for every single repository. I'm happy to create the spreadsheet and iterate on this with somebody in an ad hoc session later on, but I really feel like a few people from this group need to go through and actually like stop beating around the bush. Let's actually look at all 78 repos that we have and start to make this designation. And through that process of discovery, figure out roughly like what the boundaries seem to be, what things fit and make sense, what things don't fit and don't make sense. And that can lead us into like whether or not it make, like if we have all these Kubernetes SIG orgs, where would things fall in them today?
No, I think the point is like, I don't want to try and retrospectively organize everything. And that's not the purpose, right? Like the purpose is to figure out how do we give space for people to do things as a group without giving it an official blessing. And that's it in my mind. Like,
right.
That's the only problem. Like the official architecture of what fits in and what doesn't fit in, those are decisions for a different day, right?
Well,
I still think that we have to go through the exercise of looking at our current repos in the Kubernetes org and deciding what to do with some of those. It's a matter of fairness, honestly, for projects that, you know, in good faith operated in the incubation process, assuming that they would hit a certain level and graduate. If they just got caught on the wrong side of timing, that just doesn't seem fair. So
we are going in circles again. We are just rehashing the exact same things that we discussed in the previous meeting. And it is totally unproductive. Did everybody actually read the document that was produced?
Yes. What I took away from that was, can we get consensus that SIG architecture is the deciding place for what the architectural vision for Kubernetes is? And then as a result, can we look for like what projects fit in there?
So I can't open your spreadsheet, Aaron.
Okay.
But I can go through and do that. I also added a section to the document shortly after Phil shared it with some examples of things that were needed or we felt were needed in the project that don't strictly fall into the core definition of Kubernetes. So there are some practical considerations as well. I do think some group needs to decide, you know, where the line is. And I think it's personally that it's mostly pretty obvious where the line is for most things. Some things are on the edge.
Yeah, and that's why.
So for the doc, Brian, I feel like I don't have a rampant disagreement with the SIGs can propose new repos and get approval from SIG architecture section. Like that is completely sensible, and I feel like we could move forward on that maybe with a little more detail. But I think at this point, like we could put a rubber stamp on that and have some measure of success, I'd hope. I think we're iterating a lot just on the last two proposals here, whether it's SIG bound or just one big bucket. And I don't actually see a major difference between the SIG bound versus one big bucket, honestly.
So practically speaking, one org is not going to work. Whether they're SIG-specific orgs or whether they're even finer grain orgs, I don't care. But it can't just be one org. That is not manageable. Like I personally am not going to answer Slack requests to do random stuff to the org, right? Like we need a whole team of people just to maintain the org if we have one org. If you look at projects of comparable size and scope, Node has 100 repos. Cloud Foundry has 300 repos, right? Like,
so I think that's fair.
Repos, but they're not. Yeah.
That's fair. I guess then maybe we don't go and revisit all of the existing Kubernetes star repos, but I do think there's merit to what Aaron was saying about actually looking at the existing incubator repos to see where they would fit and if they would align nicely with the SIG model versus a playground model.
Ultimately, we are going to need every bit of code assigned to some SIG, right? So like every directory under package in Kubernetes, every repo, our goal is to make it clear which SIG is responsible for every bit of code in the project. So I think that it's totally reasonable to go look at the current repos and say, well, is this a mono repo like Kubernetes and Kubernetes contrib that multiple SIGs are playing in? Or is it a SIG-specific repo? I think those are the two categories we have now. And I do believe that other than contrib and Kubernetes and docs, I think almost everything else falls into a single SIG.
Well, there's like common. Who owns the all the utility stuff? We have to figure that out.
Well, so there are a couple of unowned things like the build system and utility libraries and a couple of other things. Those are on our backlog, honestly, to assign ownership of those things.
So you said that we don't want a single org. So are you for having an org for each SIG? Sorry, I missed that part.
Well, if you look at API machinery, I think they're going to need several orgs. One org is not even going to be enough. We have one for clients. We're going to need one, I think, for other bits of API machinery at minimum. So
I'm really having trouble, Brian. Why do you think we need so many different orgs? What's the main driver there?
The driver, a lot of it is permissions. There's also some other issues with discovery and things like that. Like you can only have 6 pinned repos.
But we could do a page on Kubernetes.io that highlights all of the different repos and what they do. I mean, it's not like I'm really struggling to figure out why, because there's companies out there that have like huge portfolios and they all operate within one organization also.
I think that the question that could relieve it for Brian. I totally get the ad hoc problems that could happen. I think maybe we just need to streamline the process more so that it's like, you don't get to just sort of ad hoc email people to add something to the organization or add a person to the organization. You put it in a Trello and somebody runs through it once a week or whatever it happens to be. Like, I don't know that.
Well, we also have automation and bots that need admin access to orgs and things like that.
Yeah. So that's arguing for less orgs.
No, I mean, unless.
Well, I think his concern is like you end up with the union of all bots that you want on the org if you have.
As a newcomer to the Kubernetes community, fragmenting all of this stuff across many, many organizations is going to make it very difficult for me to understand where the thing is that I'm looking for and where I can most effectively contribute. And I really, if we focus on fragmenting out for architectural reasons before we have in place something to solve that discoverability problem, we're going to be hurting ourselves tremendously.
I would disagree with that entirely, right? Because like, for example, I think the Kubernetes client breakout has been quite successful and actually makes it dramatically easier to go and contribute to the Java client than it would be if it were in the Kubernetes.
Yeah.
I wonder on a human level though, like, do we have data on how well attended each SIG is and what the roster list of each SIG would be to know if what we're even discussing is something that those groups could manage?
So here's an example. Kubernetes used to be part of the Google Cloud Platform GitHub org, and we did not have any admins on that org. So we could not add members to the org, right? We are back in that same situation like Helm adds all contributors as external collaborators instead of trying to add them as members to the org because it's such a pain in the ass to manage members of the org.
But if Helm were part of the SIG apps sort of organization, that's one thing.
Right, so that's multiple orgs again.
That is multiple orgs. I mean, the other option is and I signed up for this and didn't follow through, so that's on me. But we could actually sort of build bots around managing membership lists and actually manage that through PRs.
Which would be better.
Yeah.
It doesn't solve the bot permission problem, but it at least solves.
How many bots are we going to? I mean, like we're concentrating everything on Crow anyways, pretty much, right?
There are very few.
What about like staging, copying, and all kinds of other junk?
Yeah. There are not enough people actively contributing to Proud to hit this, and we are at the 3-minute mark. So what I want to understand is, what do we feel like we're going to walk away with to push this discussion forward into actionable things? Brian, can I look to you to like put together a proposal for how people, how SIG should come to SIG architecture and what the process should look like to propose repos into the Kubernetes org?
Yes.
How about as a concrete, since I think we all agree on it, let's do the current incubator to let's do the split. And let's put in the ones we think are absolutely going to be in. Let's kick out the ones we think are absolutely going to kick out, and let's tell the ones on the line that they should need to come to SIG architecture.
I would rather have a discussion over a spreadsheet. We can have this in public if you'd like, but I don't want to make any actionable decisions until we've had a chance to just kick around like what.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not suggesting we do this out. What I'm suggesting is that should be our action item.
Okay, Brendan, would you
agree? Since we actually all effectively agree that we need to do that.
Brendan, would you like to take that on?
What does take that on mean?
Take that on means, can you put together some sort of document that lists out all the things, and can you schedule a meeting to see who's interested to actually walk through that? Or put together your straw man and send out the straw man to the mailing list so we can get some discussion on do we have consensus on what?
I think we have to have everybody vote, I guess, maybe.
Well, okay, so here's what I would
not everyone in the community, everyone on the steering committee to vote.
I would be game for a meeting where we go through the spreadsheet that Aaron put together, look for categories, patterns, clean lines, what's on the bubble, and try and actually derive from that what we think some of the guardrails are.
We are undoing what I thought was progress from the previous meeting in this meeting in terms of priority setting.
Can you help me define what would be a better priority and chunkable action, Brian?
On making sure that organic efforts in the projects can actually move forward, like moving stuff out of the Kubernetes repo, moving stuff out of Kubernetes contrib, organic work that SIGs needs to do, unblocking those things as opposed to addressing cruft that's already in incubator or projects that want to.
Can you define that in terms of an action item?
Hang on. Can we just have a vote effectively? Because I think those are two totally valid paths forward, right? We can either say we want to clean up incubator, or we can say we want to give people a path out of Kubernetes. Can we vote to which one we prioritize? Because I actually don't care. I see either vote.
Can't we do both at the same time?
No.
Apparently not.
yeah. No.
So I viewed the action item that Brian had signed up for, which was this is how you go engage with SIG architecture, as the thing that defines how you get out of kube. I don't know what more we would have to vote on for that right now. It seems like there's a pretty clear item on that, and there wasn't.
And that's fine. I'm happy to put that out there for people.
There is the question of projects that are incubator now, wondering what their future is. Why are some projects that have graduated, are they going to have the same opportunities that those projects have? I think there's sort of community equity issue that's in front of us there.
Yeah. I would like us to make forward progress on that. I didn't think that we were going backwards, Brian. I felt like there was the action item that Aaron said that you would write up how to engage SIG architecture, and I felt like that was pretty not.
Yeah, I feel like that
I think the separate item of the list and getting a group of folks together to find I forget the word you used, Joe. It was a good word, like the guardrails and the patterns is what I think a subset of us should go and do before the next meeting.
I also want a third thing, which is to figure out what we a vote on the proposal that Brendan had laid out earlier, that it seems like some people were on board for, in that SIGs would have their own orgs.
So I would ask that gets written up a little more crisply, or added as an option onto Phil's doc.
Okay.
I think right now it's too described.
It is. It was vetoed.
It is. Yeah, I don't understand why it was vetoed, because I was all for that when we talked about it. So, can we unveto that and vote?
Actually, who vetoed that? I'm sorry, I missed that in the highlighting. I see that.
Right. We're over time. Brandon and Michael, can you two collaborate on putting all process together, send it out to the list, and some comments on that. Joe, I'll take the action item to put that spreadsheet out on the incubator repos, and we can just have a discussion. All I'm looking for is to do the exercise of walking through all the repos and seeing like what SIG do we think owns them and like where would they go. I'm not trying to make any decisions based on this. I just want to see what we're talking about when we talk about these 20 plus repos in Incubator.
Okay, so just quickly on the veto issue, the main issue was who would get to decide what repos get created under all the SIGs. That was the main issue, that there's no decision structure in place for individual SIGs.
Yeah.
Can you defer that decision structure and like we say, this is we see the process moving forward, but and then
that
the
was my comment on the doc is that we defer that. So anyway, go look at that section of that.
So we are way over time. I need to break.
Okay, thanks everybody. I'll see you offline.
Bye.